Welcome so much. As you will just have noticed, we are going to be recording the session. If there is any reason why you do not want to be recorded, but you do want to engage with the speakers, feel free to put it in the chat or to alert Kathleen or myself in a private message, and we will make sure that you are able to engage because we know this is a sensitive topic for some people. But anyway, welcome everyone to this plenary session of the RDA on a really topical issue at the moment, which we've titled Resilience in Times of Crisis, Strengthening Open Science Against Geopolitical Pressures. And we have designed this as a panel discussion at the moment. We have five amazing speakers, Hugh, Sarah, Shelley, Linda, and Jorun, and two moderators, myself, Louise, and Kathleen. I will leave it up to the speakers to introduce themselves because each speaker is going to give a short introductory statement as to their position on the topic. And then we're going to move into a broader discussion. Please, at any point, if you have questions for the speakers, please do add them into the chat. And then we can really start a discussion about this very important topic. But to just give a little bit of introduction as to why we're so pleased to host this session and the panelists. I think we all recognize we're living in quite interesting times in relation to our enthusiasm as an RDA community for open science and particularly for open data. We've seen in the last 5 years the advent of the UNESCO recommendation of open science, which was signed by all member states in 2021, which really set out a very ambitious approach to rethinking what open science should look like. So we've moved beyond the more traditional open scientific knowledge frameworks to ones that include open science infrastructures, open engagement with societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems. And what the UNESCO framing of open science has really done as well is refocus our attention on the Sustainable Development Goals, on the importance of multi-societal actors in knowledge creation, and about finding different ways that open science can facilitate these conversations and pull different knowledge actors into these discussions that are focused on collective benefit and societal good. So, a very exciting time for us as open science enthusiasts to be working in this area. But at the same time as we were getting all excited about the UNESCO recommendation, we also recognize that we live in very uncertain times. We live in times of extreme geopolitical volatility. And this, I think, can be encapsulated in some of the changes we've seen in the US recently. Obviously, the US is not the only country that has been experiencing geopolitical changes in the way that they're engaging with research, but it is a good case study and has definitely put some of these issues front and center, not only in the news, but also in our minds as researchers and research support staff and research infrastructure providers. In terms of the US, we saw in 2025 a decision from the Trump administration to withdraw the United States from UNESCO, which places a huge amount of uncertainty onto the UNESCO recommendation of open science, because all of a sudden we have a very prominent signatory withdrawing from the international compacts that we were using to drive forward our justification and discussions around open science. We've also seen huge amount of changes in the US, the Trump administration's attitude to data, particularly federal data, which has led to projects like the Data Rescue Project, conducting data rescue activities for data sets under threat. We've seen rapid changes in approaches, geopolitical approaches to sanctions between the US and other countries, and we've seen huge amounts of changes in not only the amount of funding being given to research, but also the areas in which the funding is being directed. So lots of things happening at the moment which are putting a lot of pressure onto the way we are thinking about open science and forcing us to rethink the strategies that in 2021 seemed very apparent and very optimistic. And what unfortunately we have to recognize is this is all happening at the moment, and all this has happened before, and it will happen again. And this means that it is a very important time for us to think about what this means for open science. What does it mean for us to have a global movement towards openness? And what are the areas that the UNESCO recommendation on open science and other framings of open science are currently missing out on when it comes to building better resilience to these geopolitical tensions and pressures on open science, the open science ecosystem? So Kathleen and I have been very interested in this for quite a while, and we were very lucky to receive some Open Science Netherlands funding last year to host a workshop in Leiden to kind of problematize this area and to bring people in to have some discussions around it. And what we had asked our participants to do, very kindly, was to write a position statement about their concerns around geopolitics and open science, and then to lead to a broader discussion. So, in the spirit of that workshop and the success of that workshop, we've invited back some interlocutors and some potential interlocutors who weren't able to join us at the original workshop to redo the format, to offer some positions on where these geopolitical pressures are putting tension on open science and what can be done about it. But just to carry on the conversation, Kathleen is now going to talk a little bit more about the findings of the original workshop and then set the scene for the panelist position statements.
Great, thanks,
And
Louise.
I am in charge of the slides, aren't I? Yes.
You are. So here we are. Great. So coming out of that workshop, one of the outputs that we wanted to work towards was to create a position statement targeting UNESCO in the Netherlands in particular. And drawing on the individual position statements from participants, as well as a wealth of discussions and group work at this workshop, which Louise was describing, we came up with 4 points, which really encapsulated our discussions, which point to areas where we think we need further action and also further discussion. So I'll just kind of review these 4 points, but these will be kind of the starting point for the questions which we'll be posing to our panel members today. So the first point is perhaps no surprise to people within this community, and that is that a lot of this work of open science and work of research data and data rescue that's arisen is often volunteer labor. And these types of human infrastructures and networks that exist between volunteers are really key to actually working towards resilience. So during the workshop, and maybe today also, we can think about what this would look like in practice to kind of sustain these types of human infrastructures and networks, which are so important in this work. The second point for discussion and action, which we came up with, was the importance of redundancy and what we called considered infrastructural relationships. Now, the idea of redundancy, going back to kind of my librarian days, is really rooted in this idea of lots of copies keeping stuff safe. So having multiple copies of content in geographically distributed areas of the world, maybe connected through some type of federated approach or federated system. Now, actually thinking about where these types of redundant efforts should be located in terms of geopolitical forces or in terms of other aspects of infrastructures, I think is something that we need to consider more today, as well as infrastructures of different types. So we have more established infrastructures, more agile infrastructures, and we also have platforms such as more proprietary platforms and big tech platforms, which are also kind of implicated in this space when we talk about infrastructures. So again, thinking how to form these considered infrastructural relationships as we work towards resiliency is important. The third point really draws on this term of anticipatory maintenance, and this comes out of work by our colleague Laura Rothfritz at Humboldt University in Berlin, which really emphasizes the need to plan in times when things are going well as in times when things are not going so well. So a lot of the actions that we're seeing right now are responsive, especially in the US, in response to the threats and response to the actions from the Trump administration. But this idea of anticipatory maintenance really is more thinking about how we can embed resilience thinking into regular workflows and make it part of kind of everyday life and planning so that we're more ready in the future. The final point is actually something that Hillary also mentioned in the opening plenary. I guess that was only yesterday. And that relates to the international nature of open science or research more broadly, which requires perhaps thinking about different funding streams, different types of policy action, or different types of planning that moves away from more kind of nationalistic forms to more international approaches. So this is also something that we think is important to continue to think about as we are furthering this discussion on resilience. Louise, could you go to the next slide then? So today, this is kind of what we're thinking of for our agenda. We'd really like to build on these 4 points from this workshop, as well as draw on the expertise of the panelists today to think about how we can move this discussion forward. What are the next steps that we need to be thinking about? What types of actions? And also, in particular, for this community, how can the RDA respond to these types of geopolitical forces? So we'll begin with just an introductory statement from each of our speakers, at which time they'll also introduce themselves. And we ask them to think about, what is really important to them, what is interesting to them in this space about resilience, and what are kind of the key issues that they're thinking about in their areas. Following the speaker statements, Louise and I will have a round of moderated questions, kind of centering on each of those 4 different points which were on the previous slide. And then we really hope to have some time for some audience interaction and get to some of your questions. So again, as you're listening, as you're thinking, please post your questions in the chat. And then hopefully we'll have some time to address some of those questions at the end of the session. All right, so I think that's all from our side. Louise, anything else to add? Nope. All right, then let's go ahead and proceed with the statements from the panelists. So Linda, you are up first.
Hi, thank you. Can you can hear me okay, just to check on that. Awesome.
All
So
good.
my name's Linda Kellum. Great. I am here to representing the Data Rescue Project. The Data Rescue Project, I'm sure some of you have heard of at least. It's a grassroots volunteer community that emerged in 2025, focused on ensuring continued access to public data for the public good. Our work centers on US federal public data produced through the Federal Statistical System in the United States, and we organize rapid response efforts when those data appear at risk. Next slide. Just have a couple of slides to go through, but to give you context, if you aren't familiar with our community, we are a community primarily of librarians, but we also include archivists, data curators, technologists, researchers, some journalists, and members of the public who share a goal to ensure that public data remains accessible, usable, and trustworthy over time. Next slide. So over the past year, our volunteers have helped identify and preserve more than 2,500 at-risk data sets. It's actually 2,900 at this point. So I need to change the slide again. And those data sets range over 90 federal agencies, and we have more than 900 volunteers who've signed up or who've contacted us to work with us. But more importantly, I think, or just as importantly, we helped build an active international community of people who care deeply about the future of public data. And so what interests me most about the questions of resilience, geopolitical pressures, and open science is the role that public data plays as part of the knowledge infrastructure that supports research, governance, but also democratic accountability. Risks that we have been seeing to public data aren't deletion. I think in the media, they tend to focus on disappearing data sets is the term, but that is not really the main problem we have. More often, the risks are a complex mix of factors, such as changes to websites, delayed publications, missing documentation, altered interfaces, or the gradual loss of historical context and metadata that makes the data interpretable. Those losses affect research and policy communities that rely on consistent, well-documented public data, but they also impact the public. And so one of the things we've been doing is not just focusing on major data sets, some of which we can access, we've also focused on things like data visualization, data stories, data dashboards, the things that make data understandable to the American public. Next slide. So to support our work, we've had to rely on infrastructure, and one of those that we rely on is ICPSR's Data Lumos. If you're not familiar with this, you can go and find most of the data sets we backed up there. Next slide. We also have created a data rescue project portal, which is a catalog of backups across the different data rescue communities. So it includes backups that we've done, but also safeguarding research and culture from Germany or based out of Europe and others. And these tools help both ICPSR and Data Rescue Project Portal help to coordinate preservation efforts and make it easier to track where copies of our data sets have gone. Next slide. So over the past year, this work has taught us several important lessons about resilience in public data systems. And the first is that resilience requires civic engagement. This is something I'll harp on until the day I die, I think. But federal workers and government agencies play an essential role in producing and stewarding public data. But resilience also comes from distributed networks of people and institutions who recognize the value of these data and are prepared to mobilize when access is threatened. Civic data stewardship communities can act as early warning systems and rapid response networks when vulnerabilities emerge. And that's why we need the volunteers. We cannot sustain only volunteers, but we need to have the volunteers. Second, we recognize that the fragility of public data systems, that they're both fragile and they're resilient. Data systems depend on technical infrastructure, policy decisions, institutional capacity, and sustained funding. At the same time, I think the federal statistical system is also remarkably resilient. Moving forward, we need to examine not only where the system fails, but also where continuity and data provision is maintained and understand where the differences are. Understanding what works and what could be strengthened is essential for improving long-term resilience. And one example of this that I think is really interesting for me is the public comment process. This is something that the public comment process has become, is one that Data Index, another group, is playing up quite a bit. And I think they're doing a fabulous job trying to encourage people to comment on any changes to data sets. Those comments help to create a documented record of concerns and priorities that agencies and future researchers could reference. And I think that's an important part where we do still have the system working for us. And finally, we'll continue to have a growing need for coordination across communities. The public data systems involve many different actors, from government agencies themselves to the libraries, archives, technologists, all those civil society groups that are involved, not just Data Rescue Project, not just PEDP, but not just RDA, but all of the different groups that are involved. And maintaining those relationships and coordination mechanisms, even after the crisis moments start to pass, is essential for long-term resilience. The past year has shown how powerful that collaboration can be, and I think sustaining that moving forward will be critical. One of the examples I just want to shout out today, although there's quite a few, and you can go to the next slide, is an effort. I think the name of it's going to be Coalition for Resilient Ecosystem for Data Infrastructure. We're still deciding on the title, but it's a group that has been brought together by the Center for Open Science to talk through how to create a resilient system for federally funded research data, which is not something the Data Rescue Project has focused on specifically. We've mostly focused on public data. This is a different category, but we've been laying trying to create a strategic plan for how we can approach bolstering and backing up federally funded research data. And I think these kinds of efforts are the ones that I really see hope in going forward. Next slide. So our leadership, within our group, our leadership is committed to leaving behind resources and infrastructure that can support future rapid response efforts that are grounded in data stewardship principles. We hope to have a playbook that we can give the next group that has to do this, because there will be another group of volunteers doing this in some country at some time in the future. Open science depends on durable public data, and ensuring that durability requires strong institutions, careful stewardship, and communities willing to step in when those systems are under pressure. And resilience in public data is about protecting a shared public good. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Linda. There's lots of interesting points that hopefully we can talk about in just a little bit. Sarah, I pass it over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Ruhi. I'm a co-author on the Declaration to Defend Research from U.S. Government Censorship. I'm based right outside Washington, D.C., and I'm still recovering from being ill, so I beg your pardon for my voice at the moment. Please let me know if you can't hear me. Next slide, please. A bit about my background. I am a scholarly publishing professional by day, but I'm speaking to you today in my personal capacity, both as a person who's worked in scholarly communications for a long time, but also as a person who's trained in political science and political theory, and who's taken to this free speech work since February alongside a group of like-minded folks. Next slide, please. The Defend Research group that co-authored this declaration came together in February of last year, right when the new administration was barraging all of us with executive orders that directly impacted science. And you'll see all of us are listed here with our org IDs, but none of us affiliate with our professional affiliations because they're already individuals who are coming under fire or their organizations are for being public. One of the reasons we came together was we were very frustrated that across the publishing ecosystem, we represent different. I'm with a publisher. Some of us are from libraries. Some of us are researchers. We were shocked at the lack of collective action. And as Linda said, that kind of mutual aid is critical, and we weren't seeing it. So we came together and wrote the declaration, which is the QR code on every slide. And then the next couple slides are just kind of walking through the things that we observed and were concerned about. So next slide, please. Day one, they came out of the gate really hard in ways that were, I think, kind of shocked everyone into like that fight or flight response. Next slide. The list of censored words that the administration was providing, and if you click again, you'll see this is a publicly updated list with PEN America. Sorry, it's a typo. It should be PEN America. Is bananas. This list is crazy. I think for many of us working in the US, it was the first time that we were seeing actual words targeted by an administration for censorship. Next slide, please. And the guidance, and you can click again on this, on how to censor grants, for example, was publicly made available at the time. So we had decision trees like this. Next slide. We also had, and you can click through all of this animation. We also learned that at the time when DOGE, the Department on, what's it, Government Efficiency. Sorry, I tried to black out that part of our lives at the time. But there is a very useful lawsuit that's happening right now that's lifting the lid on how a lot of these grants were canceled, and they were largely canceled by children using a combination of ChatGPT and whatever expertise a 22-year-old would have to do this work. So thankfully, we're getting more insight into what happened at the time, but we've come a long way since then. So next slide, please. But as I think Kathleen or Louise said in her opening statement, none of this is new. And I always like to point, having a political science background, coming to the US as an immigrant with parents from two countries that have never really had freedom of expression, at least in recent memory. It's easy to be really shocked in the US, like, how could that happen here? How can this happen to us? But the fact is, it's always happened. It'll happen again. That's what the resilience conversation is about. So this article in Science in 1937, I think, speaks to exactly what we're dealing with right now, that scientific inquiry can only develop to its full extent in an atmosphere of political freedom. In the current moment that we are in the US, but certainly to a lesser degree in Europe and other places, restricts scientific work to particular classes and thus destroys the international character of the pursuit of knowledge. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Defend Research is really focused on censorship. It's a very specific kind of authoritarian attack that can get lost in the context of losing grant funding. This administration has a way of changing the topic every 2 minutes. So can feel like a very small piece of the pie here, but given our background in scholarly communications, this is where we want to focus. And the next slide, which is a preview of a presentation we're doing at UKSG. So if anyone is attending UKSG, I would love to meet you in person. We're really focusing on the visible censorship. The other aspects of censorship in terms of institutional control and systemic erosion, my co-presenters are speaking to today, but these are the pieces to really think about when you're thinking about how the system is being affected by this kind of work and what resilience is going to look like to address each of these. Sorry, I'll try to move fast. Next slide, please. So how do we think of resilience? We're a group of 5 volunteers that have to do this in our spare time. The Declaration to Defend Research has over 5,000 global signatories, and many of them are institutions and organizations. So if you click through, I think they should pop up here. Emerald Publishing was the first institution publisher to sign on. Unfortunately, very few US organizations have been able to publicly sign on. If you click through, there's 3 more things that'll pop up here. So we're engaging in a lot of partnership with other like-minded organizations to sort of raise the alarm on these issues. Every library, we do a lot of work with Scholarly Kitchen. If you click through one more, we do a lot of public sessions like this one. So very grateful to be invited here. Will be at UKSG as well. The challenge is the stakeholder environment in scholarly communications does not lend itself to this kind of collective practice, which we can talk about more in the conversation. And so a lot of our work in terms of resilience is about the kind of linking that Linda was talking about. Next slide, please. We provide a lot of tools. We speak frequently, particularly with librarians and information professionals in the US who are rather despondent that their organizations are not taking a more active approach. So we try to provide a lot of concrete things individuals can do, and then to amplify the work of folks like Data Rescue Project and others. So if you are working in this area and are looking for a partner in this, please reach out to us. And the last slide, the big piece that we moved to this year that I'm very excited about is we have a monthly webinar series now where we're engaging with experts from a wide range of backgrounds on the impact of censorship in science and in research. We've had 2 already. Our 3rd one will be in April. Our 4th is in May, but we have scheduled out through the rest of the year. So we're really looking forward to using these as a mechanism for informing the general public, which is another node in this resilience conversation that we should discuss a bit more. So lastly, next slide, I'll leave you with the opening. Oh, I forgot the actual declaration. I'll put a link to the declaration in the chat. I hope you'll consider signing it and supporting our work. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Sarah. But yeah, we'll speak more in the discussion. Hugh.
Okay. Lovely to have a chance to speak to you all today. I'm again going to be touching on many of the points that are said here, and I just would like to kind of reiterate one point is that in the chat, Kathleen put a link to the report that came out from that Leiden workshop. If there is one thing that all of you are going to read from this particular meeting, do read that. It's a really, really nice, concise description of the situation, and it pulls in a lot of what's being said here. And I feel like, oh yeah, no, these points, I'm already reiterating the points that are there. So read it, it'll be good for you. So yeah, I'm Hugh. I'm based at Royal Holloway, which is a smallish university west of London in leafy green Surrey. Can I go on to the next slide, please? So the things that we were asked to sort of say, well, what in particular is relating to resilience, geopolitical pressures, and open science is of interest to you? And they're particularly interested in the role of research infrastructures in open science and how fragile they are at present and how to make them more resilient in the future. So if I can just go on to the next slide, Louise, thank you. So our tendency is to think of research infrastructures as this, and if we can click on that, we get pictures of a server, right? Servers, servers, more servers, all right? And then sometimes it'll be pictures of refrigerators or stuff like that, okay? And if I can just go on to the next slide, the thing I would just want to reiterate, which was one of the first points that's made there in that report, is really when it comes down to it, research infrastructures are actually mostly made of people, and they're the ones who keep the services going. They are the ones who have the experience and knowledge. They train the next generations and so on. A key point here in all of the situations that we're talking about this resilience, is that our tendency is to focus on the very sort of physical stuff. And physical, I also mean hard disk drives, but also the fact that if we lose people, then actually that likewise, you're pretty much dead in the water as well. So people are enormously important when we also think about research infrastructures. Okay, if I can just move on to the next slide. So as has already been said, things are very, very turbulent at the present moment. And one of the things that we need to do is to start looking at research infrastructures and start asking uncomfortable questions about its overall resilience, not just the kind of almost like, oh my God, this is happening. Oh my God, this is happening, but trying to look in general. And one of the things that's there is the fact that research infrastructures are very heavily dominated by individual countries. This example that I'm quoting here is US based, but I'm also talking about the more wealthy countries are the ones which tend to have large research infrastructures. And they're also dominated heavily by commercial providers. So if I can give an example of preprint services that we looked at, and in particular looking at ASAP Bio, who've compiled the list. Louise, if you could just click one more time. Yeah. So we looked at 64 preprint services. They're heavily dominated by ones which are based in the US. So most of them are based in the US at the present moment. They're also heavily dominated by hosted by overwhelmingly by commercial services. So if I get one more click there, Louise, we see that basically three commercial providers, Cloudflare, Google, and Amazon, are again hosting most of those. There's a nice little blip there for St. Patrick's Day in the previous slide of preprint services coming out from Ireland, but they're all basically hosted by Microsoft because Ireland has loads of data centers. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I am saying that in some respect, what's happening is eggs are being put into one basket. And that's a thing that we really need to think about. And if I could play the AI buzzword bingo game, other services such as large language models, again, heavily hosted in services that are happening in a subset of countries. So these are unexpected fragilities. But at the same time, we need to be aware of other ones. So other countries can likewise go through their equivalent of a vodka and cocaine binge. All right. We can see civil upheaval in terms of civil wars happening, such as what we see in Ukraine, or indeed natural disasters. So, for example, again, I pointed out to this idea, oh, I've been lovely leafy, sorry, which was surrounded by lovely forests. 20, 30 years from now, we're going to be like Greece in terms of we're going to be dealing with wildfires, okay? And suddenly all of those resources are going to be looking a lot more fragile. If I can go on to the last slide, I'm sorry for running over. I wanted to talk about the key issues here, okay? Which is that point that was raised already about how can we make services more redundant, okay? Kathleen's really nice idea of let's have more copies of books. That's good. You know, how do we do the equivalent of that? We also need to be able to monitor fragility on a global basis. Again, I want to quote that really, really nice piece of work by Laura Rothfuss, which is about the fragility of volunteer networks. Okay, people jumped into that in terms of this is we're talking about 2016, and they, as she's, in her interviews, people were sort of saying, yeah, I felt really kind of like a hero trying to solve these problems. But if I paraphrase David Bowie for just a moment, yeah, we can all be heroes for one day. The problem is when we're expected to be heroes for 1,000 days. All right. And that's just not sustainable. People can't sustain that. All right. So we need to think about mechanisms to support those people in a gentle kind of way to make sure that they're doing a more sort of regular type of job. The one last thing I would like to say is that so far, a lot of the kind of data being moved around is sort of happening in national borders. We also need to think about being able to move data beyond those outside of national borders and coming up with ways to at the same time respect the sovereignty of the data sets. And these are things that we need to think about. Sorry, so I've gone on for a bit, so I'll wrap up there. Thanks.
Thanks, Hugh, also for bringing David Bowie to our presentation. That's always good. All right, Jeroen, you are next.
Yes, thank you. I hope no one noticed that I needed to drop out of the call for 5 minutes or so because my other laptop was down suddenly, so was not so resilient, I think. Thank you for having me on this call. My name is Jeroen Zondervan. I'm working as program leader Open Scholarly Communication at Open Science NL, which is a national initiative of 10 years, which comes with funding from the Ministry of Education and Science in the Netherlands, really to support open science implementations in the broadest sense possible. I will come back to that later on. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview. Many more statements have been published also in the Netherlands. The majority of these are coming from Dutch institutions, stakeholders, like the Royal Academy of Sciences, but also the university libraries, reacting on the things that have happened in the last 12, 13 months or so. Especially what's going on in the US currently with the defunding and the attacks on science. Just to highlight that this is really now also on the top of minds, at least in the Dutch landscape. As Louisa explained, we have organized events around this topic, so this is really on top of minds. Next slide, please. Ooh. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there are links behind the picture, so you need to be careful how you click. Maybe use the arrows. Yeah. So this is just an example of some of the things that I already highlighted, also in by some previous speakers, but just to highlight some of the immediate threats like defunding. But also I want to highlight what's happening with the AI bots and the scraping of open knowledge products in repositories, which have led to downtime of several repositories, as you can see in the middle. So these services are really disrupted by, for instance, the AI bot scraping. That said, it's not only the things that happen now in the US, right? We have many more threats to I think to talk about and to discuss what's really threatening the infrastructures and academic research at large. Next slide. So openness to the rescue, or how can open science be helpful in this case? These are just a few examples of, I think, resilience strategies. Not to dwell too much on the data rescue project portal, for instance, because we have someone in the call here. But that's really about rescuing and restoring data and other research outputs, responding to an immediate threat. What we also saw in the last couple of months is the creation of alternatives, also mirroring of data sets, but also infrastructure. Think of Archive, for instance, which now has an instance in Germany. But I like to call Europe PMC, had the European equivalent of PubMed in the US, also as a way of mirroring and trying to establish infrastructure, in this case, in a European landscape, but collectively funded by a lot of, I think 22 members are involved in funding this infrastructure across Europe. And another example of sustaining and really collaborating, in this case, I want to highlight Open Research Europe, which was initially funded by the European Commission, started to publish papers on the platform in 2021. And we are really now in the move towards, and that will happen this year, to a Open Research Europe 2.0, the new phase, where many more funders and institutions will be involved in collectively funding this platform. I want to highlight this as a few examples of how collaboration is happening and could be strengthened, I think, in the long term, touching upon also the things you have said in terms of how to sustain infrastructures for the long term. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I want to highlight this only just as an example of how we work at Open Science NL. So the Dutch initiative, it's a 10-year initiative. It comes with an annual budget of around 20 million to really support open science implementations and developments in the Netherlands. And we have built our work programs. We work in 2-year cycles to be flexible and to be responsive also to the things that are happening in the outside world, and to address specific urgencies quickly. And we structure our work programs using or inspired by the pyramid of Brian Nosek in his Strategy for Cultural Change blog of 8-9 years now. And I think we now also in this call really discuss the 3 lower bars. So the communities, the capacity building, the people that need to work on actually doing it, and infrastructure, of course, how to safeguard that. But it's also, I think, important to really talk about the incentives, and that was highlighted in also briefly in the introduction. The people that are actually doing all the work that is necessary to rescue the data and all the things we're talking about today. I think we need to also really discuss how to really make it visible and how to move to make it also rewarding on a more structural basis. Next slide, please. Sorry for that. Yeah, so these are just a few examples of which I wanted to highlight because they really touch upon the discussion of today. These are just a few examples of projects that we have funded, we're able to fund. So on the left top side, or on the left side, this is really about capacity building and the communities that we want to empower. The top is the training platform, RDNL, the training platform for data stewards, which is now currently running. It has a website. Probably a lot of people in the call already know about this. If you don't, please follow this link to the RDNL training platform and learn from it. I think this is really a nice example of strengthening the community and enable people to build up skills in this area. The lower part is the overview of the current open science communities we have on a local level, at the institutional level. And we were able to fund for 2 years these communities to support them in their activities, really on the ground, supporting researchers and support staff to engage with open science and to practice open science. And on the right side, just recently we have awarded 45 projects, infrastructural projects, open science infrastructural projects in a large flagship call, over 30 million is going to these 45 projects, ranging from more discipline-specific open science infrastructures to really generic open science and supportive infrastructures, also for open access, but also for data, and also for citizen science. Next slide, please. And that's I think my last slide to conclude. Sorry for the links. Be careful. Yeah. I just wanted to highlight this. Together with my colleague Jeroen Bosman, I wrote a blog post last year, somewhere in May, as a response to what's happening in the US. And we present a framework of how to approach this idea of resilience, and try to identify different steps in threats and how you could respond, which leads hopefully to more resilience. And that means we need to focus on the systems, but also the communities, which are really important. And of course, we need to help and assist individuals. And on the left side, this is really a very quick summary of what's in the blog. But I think it's really necessary to try to establish more collective action in the field amongst stakeholders. So being funders, but also the institutions, and of course, really supporting researchers. And I want to highlight really that support communities and collaboration part also, which I think really touches upon the things we are discussing also today, as is the prioritization of infrastructure and our open infrastructures, and really talk about and discuss how we are going to be more redundant, how we are going to be more resilient. And that means that we need to think about training, and of course ask ourselves the sustainability question. And I want to leave it with that.
Great, thanks very much, Jeroen. And that brings us to our final panelist for the day, Shelley.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm actually going to talk about something that's about to happen as opposed to work that has been done. So, and I'm going to, before I forget, I'm going to hit enter because you're all welcome to participate going forward. And we would really like that. So there is a meeting. It was invite only. Forgive me for doing that. We only had 100 spots, and we needed to fill those with earth, space, and environmental science, discipline-specific research infrastructure decision makers. We definitely will have been imperfect in doing so, and folks will. We want to consider this particular meeting happening next week in Berlin to be a launching point. So do put your name in the form if you're interested in connecting with this in whatever capacity you would like to. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. So AGU, the American Geophysical Union, is where I work, and our community is global. We partner with a number of other societies and countless organizations. And the work that I do is driven by our data position statement. And here is just a really high level, and I encourage you all to take a look. It's a couple pages long. A number of folks on this call have actually participated in updating this statement over the years. And our data are a world heritage. And so the risk and impact happening not only in the data, but the people who understand the data is real. It's real. It's real not only in the US, but it's also happening in other countries. So this global convening we're having is recognizing that we have a moment in time, an inflection point where I'm getting goosebumps, guys. This has been quite the effort to get this all to happen. But it's really an opportunity for us to create a global infrastructure. I use that word lightly. I realize the folks of you who are technical folks are going to be like, yeah, Shelley, it's not going to actually be one infrastructure. Yeah, sure, it's going to be dispersed. But to do that, to remove all the barriers for our researchers such that what we do will be better than what we have today. So it will not only deal with the risks that we are in the middle of, but also put us in a position to support any organization, any individual, any team having these kinds of challenges. It could be a natural hazard. I mean, do you remember when the NOAA repository in Asheville got hit by a hurricane that was not ever even estimated to happen, took them down for a good while? So that's one example. Two geopolitical challenges that we're dealing with today. I did ask Sarah if she could be really cautious on how she promotes this event for social media. The people coming to the meeting, I will also ask, we really want to stay out of the limelight. We want to be able to do our work without being impacted. So thanks, Sarah. I know you won't, but I'm just letting everybody understand that it's a no kidding, uh, I don't want to make it worse than it is, but it's a no kidding situation. It's very difficult for our federal workers, NOAA and NASA, USGS, anybody to A, travel, and B, travel outside the US, and C, travel to something like this. So we won't see anybody at this meeting. We are going to have to pay attention to who is not in the room as well as who is in the room. So having other ways of participation, making sure we're launching for broadening the work as we move forward is very keen on my mind. So that form I've given you, please share it with your networks as you see fit. You're also welcome to wait until we have some of the materials out so you can frame what it is that we're doing. So it doesn't have to be this moment if you don't want to. Could you go ahead on to the next slide? So here is, by the way, this is the first project I've had at AGU where my CEO has to approve every word. So please know there is so much cleansing and so much not manipulation. I don't want to say it like that. Carefully selected verbiage that it's sometimes hard to see exactly what we intend in the meeting. I think this list comes really close. So the global collaboration, the roadmap. I mean, I have one more slide to talk about the roadmap. Securing commitments, that's probably not a public thing we're doing. We're probably doing that very cautiously in the room. Best practices on data set mitigation. Steve Diggs has done an awful lot of work on that. Steve's going to talk about that. We're not solving that problem during the meeting. We're just helping people understand examples and approaches. And Steve, if you want to put that new paper of yours with Mark Parsons in the chat, this is a great time to do it. Steve just published something. And also working documents that we can then iterate on with everybody who maybe didn't make it into the room and continue to broaden that. If all goes well, I'm hoping this work will land in the RDA community of practice for the Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences. I don't want to push it there, but I'm sort of trying to lean into that as being a nice neutral place for this work to happen and a great place for it to be sustained over time. The roadmap, let me talk about the roadmap. Well, next slide, please. So again, we want to co-develop this, and it's really, really hard to try to give people exactly what's going to happen, but also co-develop at the same time. So I'm cautiously giving you these dimensions, and we're going to let the room actually flesh them out. It's one of the first things that we're going to do during the week. And we're talking here about, and we wanted to apply the term interoperable to all three of these, data, infrastructure, and governance, but it doesn't make sense. So we tapped back a little bit and we said, all right, well, what words could we use? So interoperable data such that the researcher has the least possible number of barriers, or we work towards that. Collaborative infrastructure such that we're all providing value, that we're really looking at our infrastructure, our repositories, and all of the other supporting elements as value add to research, social decision making, everything that you all depend on for. Oh, thanks, Steve. There you go. There's the paper, and also the governance. We want this to be the lightest touch of governance that continues to be useful. So that will be a really interesting discussion. And this is global. We're talking global governance. So we're not replacing anything happening in the European Commission. We're not replacing anything happening that's working for everybody else. This is essentially a coordination level. Oh, bye, Linda. Thanks for being here. And so it is how do we do this to remove barriers such that interoperable data and collaborative infrastructure work and that we are really coordinating across. Okay, that's it. It's hard to answer questions until things happen, but I'm happy to do so if I can. I think that's my last slide.
Great. Thanks, Shelley, also for giving us kind of a look into what the work is going to be in the future. And I see lots of people giving rounds of applause for all of those presentations, which were really great. I realized we maybe went over a little bit in time, but I think it was totally worth it. Hugh, I see that you also maybe had a hand raised. Okay, I think you were meaning to applaud for all of the great presentations also. All right, so then let's go ahead and move on to some questions that Louise and I have prepared. And again, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat as you're listening, and we will try to get to some of those. So our plan is to talk through some of those points that we had in the introduction. So the first point is something that I've heard kind of coming up in multiple talks, and there's been some action in the chat about this also. And this is the point about human infrastructure and social networks being a really important but underfunded tool in this work towards resilience. So I think I will address the first question here first to Linda and Sarah, and then if the rest of the panelists have something to say, please, we can chime in there. But Linda and Sarah, I wonder, I mean, you both have been really active in developing these kind of volunteer networks in response to the activities in the US lately. So first question is, what are the key challenges that you've really faced in getting these networks up and going? And then the second question is thinking kind of long term, how can we actually sustain these networks, these connections between people between times of crisis, so that when it happens again, or the next time this happens somewhere else, we have these kind of human infrastructure and social networks kind of ready to be mobilized. So Linda and Sarah, that is a question to you.
I can, Sarah, if you want me to go. To answer the key hurdles, one of the biggest hurdles for us was in the beginning, was trying to figure out how to coordinate at speed. I mean, because everybody knows the speed at which we were having attacks or EOs come out required that there be responsiveness very quickly. And so that was definitely a big hurdle. I think now, because that urgency has gone away, the big hurdle is there are things that are happening every so often, but figuring out how to respond, keep up volunteer interest when there isn't a state of urgency, I think is a big one. The other one's definitely thinking about the clarity of roles and boundaries. How do we complement rather than disrupt government data stewards? And so that's been definitely a challenge. I've had over the past year and a half, many times people have asked me, well, why haven't you been talking to the people in the agencies? And I think there's obvious reasons why we haven't always been able to talk to people in the agencies. But we do, and we just can't be vocal about that. And so for us, the real challenge is making sure we're, not interfering with ongoing work that they're trying to do. And then I think we've all been saying, this is a sustainability piece. Sustaining volunteers over a long time is challenging. But I think you also have to have faith in people who are doing this work, that to know when they're going to need to step back. And one of the things what we try to do, the Data Rescue Project, is be very explicit about kind of, Michaela likes to call it a slow data rescue, in the sense that we honor each other's boundaries. We know that we need to take breaks. We know that we need to step away. It isn't someone working 1,000 hours. It's people work as they can, and then we support each other. That's how networks work. It's not about one person being a hero. It's about all of us working together and putting in thousands of hours. And so I think we really need to recognize that. And I think that's what's going to sustain us between crises, is trying to, make sure that stays a network and not just something that happens once and it goes away. I'm very hopeful about the convenings That's an S on that because there are multiple convenings coming up, and the relationship building that's happening in those convenings. I'm very excited about those. Excited about what Center for Open Science has kicked off with that group. Yeah, and I'll stop there. I think those are the main things.
I think we
Yeah,
have
thanks, Sarah.
many of the same challenges. I mean, I think what's incredible about Data Rescue Project, and we've presented together in the past, is the scope of the people, the number of people that you have engaged that are actually doing the work. When I think of, this kind of work, I always go to battle analogies, which are perhaps not the best ones to use right now, so forgive me. But I think of the data rescue work as, that like those there are people in the trenches doing that work. And I think a lot of the defend research work is often around communications and connecting, sort of being the links between the people in the trenches, which is A, doesn't need quite as many people, and B, can be amplified through technology, which is something that's been powerful for us. So even though our core group is about 6 or 7 people, we have over 5,000 individuals that have signed our declaration. That's a community we can activate. And then we have hundreds of institutional signatories, and they have all stepped up as and when they can to support this work, to provide fora, to help us with simple things like webinar infrastructure. So to Linda's point, there's a lot of kind of letting the community bubble up what it is able to do, and then creating that space for when people need to step back. And when there's no stigma to stepping back, then people can come in and go out as they're able to contribute. And thankfully, because our focus is largely around education, my hope is we will continue this work kind of irrespective of the context, because the consequences of censorship are going to be felt for generations long after this immediate acute period. So the same kinds of challenges, but leveraging technology to create space and really destigmatizing the jump in, jump out as you need.
Yeah, it's really kind of like a porous community, and that people can come in and come out, and yet it's also tight knit, and that it's a safe type of community is what I'm kind of hearing from both of you too. I wonder, Jeroen, if I could ask you a question also on this, because you mentioned kind of this need for incentives and making this work of data rescue kind of more rewarding, and thinking about that. I wonder from a funder's perspective, sorry to put you on the spot as our funder, but from a funder's perspective, I mean, what can be done here? Is there a role also from funders to help maintain these kind of more agile communities and networks?
Yeah, which is of course difficult. Maybe lesser so for us because we have had this context of this initiative, this program. We have even exceptions on mandates. To give you an example, and that's something I want to highlight. It's not only about the researchers or the research communities, but it's also really about the support staff, right? The data stewards, the software engineers, the open scholarly communication experts, which are really needed. And to give you one example is that we allow within the Open Science Now context that these people can also apply for specific funding instruments. So really opening up beyond research. So in the case for the infrastructure projects, for instance, in some cases researchers have applied, and in other cases support staff have applied. But I think it still has, so in terms of how to support communities, in our case, we have done this through the open science communities and through some more overarching networks like the Open Science Communities Network, the Netherlands, and also Citizen Science Network. But this is of course bound to the Netherlands, and this is of course across boundaries. So and that's really an issue. How can we try to get less fragmentation in terms of supporting communities, and so how can we increase alignment between different communities? I think that's really a challenge. And of course, this needs funding. But then again, many funding councils have their own national remit and their own national context. So that is really a complex question, I think, in terms of how to sustain long-term funding also to support these communities. Either it's researchers or research support staff.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to be put on the spot there. Do any other panelists want to respond to this question?
I will actually, real quickly. Oh, I'm sorry, Shelley, you go ahead. You haven't.
Oh, just very briefly, for the work that we're doing building the roadmap, we will be asking funders to help us make the roadmap happen, and we realize the complexity of doing that globally. We'll have to think about, each nation and what's available. And of course, the Netherlands has done just some incredible work on open science. I'm so grateful for all of the investment there and the number of projects that have been funded. So we do have access to some philanthropy, and also needing to recognize that even when you can find a funder who is keen to support something that might be led out of the US, they don't want to be seen doing that right now. It is a liability for them. So we have to understand that and find neutral ways of connecting that make sense. So we are walking into our meeting knowing all of that and a number of tactics ready to go, but no answers until answers are there. So yes, a lot of good feelings and good hope, a lot of funders that are keen for our work to progress, but we won't know exactly how we're going to make it happen until it actually happens. So.
Louise, do you want to take over maybe the next line of questioning?
Oh, no, I think Sarah still had a comment.
Sarah, sorry.
Please, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to also remember, like, what are the levers to pull when, right? So a national funder, Haroon has invited me to give talks in various contexts. It's been really, tremendous opportunity for us as an organization. Like we would never want to take funding from a Gates or an organ because an organization's like, we cannot do anything with that. We cannot the infrastructure of handling that would overwhelm the work, right? But what's really powerful is if the Dutch National Funder is funding a set of organizations that can then continually decentralize what the benefits are, such that when you get to the most decentralized layer, which is arguably an organization like ours, those individuals, there's a kind of a cascade that happens around supporting us, right? So the fact that an organization like Scholastica can give us support in some pieces, Emerald and others, we need the tools to do the work, and a giant pot of money wouldn't actually enable us to do that. So resilience, I think, is really about being strategic in how you deploy resources, and money is not always, in some cases, money is sort of the least useful resource. It's about finding how to get what each node needs at the right point.
Yeah, can I jump in on that one too? I think that the other challenge people have been very generous in funding certain parts of what we do. And there was a conversation going on about how some people want to fund storage, but not the actual people to be involved with that. But the challenge too is the timing. I mean, we needed funding in March of 2025. And it didn't, funding is so slow. Those streams are so slow. And we needed major funding in March 2025. We were able to get by without it, but it would have been really helpful at that point. And so I think thinking through the mechanisms by which you do rapid response, I think is something that we'll have to do to build resiliency in the future. Because I have learned so much about funding over this past year from funders, and it's been eye-opening on how slow it is to get money rolling into these efforts.
And I think, Linda, you mentioned that the Data Rescue Project was developing a kind of playbook, documenting your experiences and going forward in the future. And I think that's going to be so important coming out of these different organizations, kind of identifying the pressure points and the bottlenecks, but also the opportunities, that Sometimes you don't need huge amounts of money or resources. You just need to know where to ask and who to ask. And, having an understanding of the landscape is really critical. Um, so I think it's really interesting kind of thinking about this international versus national and the kind of where the responsibilities and the mandates lie and how to pull this all together in a bit more. So I'm going to ask you to reflect a bit more on what you were thinking about in terms of infrastructural resilience and redundancy. So where are you thinking about redundancy being balanced with financial sustainability and also what role should commercial actors be playing in providing resilient and redundant systems for open science?
Okay, thanks, Louise. So just a couple of things just before I get to that immediately, is that we need to, in some respect, disambiguate things that are going on here, which is much of the conversation right now is what happened January 20th and last year. All right. And we're doing this. And I don't want that comment that I was, it's a cutesy line. It's not meant to be kind of unpleasant about the heroes comment. But what we have right now is the equivalent of a big fire, and everybody has got a line of buckets of water, which is being thrown on that fire and doing that. Okay, and that's something we've just got to do it. All right, and that's there. But there's a need to stand back and to say that 'twas ever thus point, that this will happen again, and that also we have to be aware that there are many other countries, middle income countries in particular, for which this is much more of a reality in their and in how things are happening. So the comments that I'm saying about building in redundancy, and this also feeds into the idea of volunteer networks as well, is about thinking about that next step. It's not about trying to fix stuff right now. We've just got to do everything that we can at the present moment. So yeah, I think redundancy is good, is the thing to note. If I could build on Kathleen's sort of analogy of, we have lots of copies of books. That's just sort of thinking about that. Yeah, that's an important idea. I think the one thing to note is that we have copies of books. We don't have copies of libraries. All right. So, and that's, I think, one of the issues is that, yeah, could we have, like what a data center does and has 3 copies of every piece of data that it has. So 3 copies of every data scattered globally, that would be great. But financially, no, that's not sustainable. What then means that we have to make an enormously painful set of decisions. And I think this is one of the things that happened at that workshop, was when this was raised, that everybody's like, no, we're not going to do that, was to say, you have to prioritize. What are the things that you're going to save from the burning building? All right. You can only carry so much. And you have to decide what are you going to prioritize. Shelley, sorry, fire ahead.
Oh no, please finish your thought, Hugh. I'm keying off the word prioritization. So go, please finish.
Oh, okay, fine. So that's the number one, is that yes, we should be thinking about redundancies. A lot of that, I think, is about things like repositories having conversations with each other in terms of saying, you keep a copy of what we need and you keep a copy of ours. That doesn't have to be active. It can be literally about thinking about sort of saying, this is the preservation side, which should hopefully be something that's a bit cheaper than sort of saying, oh, it's always on, is the first thing that I'm there. I know I'm just going to go on. I'm going to just go on. So just let me wrap it up with the question that was asked about the commercial services. I think commercial services in some respect are absolutely fantastic in terms of they provide easy and direct deployment of services. They make it super easy for us to do stuff. But at the same time, we need to be able to sort of like stop and say, okay, is that the right thing that we can do? And indeed, I think one of the things that we need to do is often, for example, to look at, again, what data repositories are doing in terms of things like the trust principles, in particular the idea of sustainability, and saying, okay, all those different types of services, are we running it in a way which kind of addresses these sorts of issues? So no, commercial services are great, but we need to be aware that they're open to their own fragilities and go in there with our eyes wide open. Okay, sorry, I'll shut up at this point.
I queuing right after Hugh and agreeing by and large everything that he's talking about. Sarah just put a note in the comments of, what exactly do you mean will be deprioritized? So so let's talk about that a little bit. Um, uh, Over the last months, a number of folks, including Steve Diggs, who's on the call here, have been working on what does it mean to actually identify the highest priority data sets. AG's run an impactful data set commentary, which many of you have submitted to, so thank you for that. And it's like that's a trick question. It depends on your motivations. It depends on what your research is. It depends on what you're trying to do. And to be quite honest, the more people that we have asking the question, what's the highest priority, the better the answer is going to be, because everybody has to dig in and protect and work with the infrastructure for the data that is most important to them. And so if we have enough community members reaching out, then yes, the bulk of the data can actually have a resilience element. And I'm not even going to try to assume what that resilience element is. I think we need to really work through that. I think Hugh also said something that we have to embrace. Not all data can be saved. Not all data should be saved. And we have kicked that can down the road as to what that means exactly. And we still want to kick that can down the road. How far? I don't know. We have NCAR, so the National Center for Atmospheric Research, is really critical for all the climate models for a number of global interests. They have a supercomputer and they've got very large petabyte holdings. Not all of that will likely be saved should they go through the disassembling that the administration is interested in doing. So this is just the reality. Something is going to not make it. So if there is an interest in it, now's the time to join. Uh, it's really important. A petabyte costs money. That's going to be one of the blockers because we're not all going to have funds. I love Hugh's idea about um, uh, like organizations working with like organizations. So that's how we're organizing our meeting next week. We are talking about ocean data, working together with ocean data, seismology, folks working with seismology and solid earth and geodesy. So we're going to hit on that such that there's a conversation I can't keep up with in the chat, and that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. Each discipline, each type of data has its own nuances, and I'm hoping that the right people are in the room or will join the conversation shortly thereafter to make it happen. So thanks, Hugh.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this point? No? I think then we are rapidly and unfortunately reaching the half hour. And I'm very mindful of the fact that there are a huge amount of amazing comments that I haven't had time to read in the chat. But to open it up to the audience, would anyone like to vocalize a question to one of the panelists? I think we have the opportunity for you to unmute yourself and ask away.
I have one to lift up. if you don't mind. I'd be
Yeah,
very
go for it.
interested in so the challenge that a number of the panelists have discussed in there's some chat in this in oh, don't highlight me, oh my God. I was at a 3 a.m. meeting this morning. Please no. Um, the people issue. I think we really need to have a conversation on the people issue because how to curate, how to understand our complex data. We really um, assume, I'm just going to use the word assume, that a repository will take care of it, a community member will take care of it, and it turns into a single point of failure potentially. I think we need to have a better plan on that.
I would totally agree. And I think that's why I think it's so interesting to host this panel at the RDA as an international, very well-established community. How can we take on some of these challenges in a more structured manner? And how can we join up between our interest groups and our working groups and our general way of being? Hugh, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, you can't get me to shut up. So one more thing on that people issue. Um, I think one of the aspects of this is the, oh my God, I'm digitized now. Is going forward is to think about the idea of having a set of monitors that are there who are kind of looking at, okay, if I'm based in Bolivia, what are the things that I see on the horizon? And this is very much like the kind of pandemic monitoring that you're seeing here. Now that's kind of awkward and it needs to be done very quietly because you're sort of saying, oh, okay, I'm based in Ireland. What political parties are on the rise who have got a decidedly anti-scientific thing? It's if you're based somewhere in a thing, you don't want to be necessarily talking about it. It needs something that needs to be done quietly. But it's like saying, yeah, that's part of a role that people who are involved in repositories or research infrastructures, that could be something that they're doing quietly, having conversations, having once a 6 months Zoom call with colleagues and saying, hey, this is where we're at and so on. And then also sort of so that you're seeing what's coming rather than it's like, oh my God, this has suddenly happened. But also the quid pro quo is the having things in place in terms of, as you said, keeping preserved copies of data and so on as the flip side of that. Again, happening through agreements between people. So.
And I see that you've put a comment in the chat. Would you like to speak to that as well?
Yeah, and that was basically also as a sort of follow-up on one of your points, had a third point on anticipatory maintenance, right? So, and I think there's not much time to discuss that because of time, but that's still reacting to, right? So, but if we, so in to use the COVID analogy, right? So to be prepared for, in this case, a pandemic, or so in some case, a preparedness, and how, yeah, and so when Yuke was talking about monitoring, that was my sort of line of thought. Is that helpful? To have an overview, of a better overview of what's happening in different areas, regions, countries, and also to find each other much quicker than indeed like ad hoc, sending out a large call for help. Yeah, so that was my thought.
Excellent. I'm very sad to say we're coming up to the half hour. Kathleen, would you like to take us home?
I think all that's left to do is say thank you at this point in time, as we don't have time, I'm afraid, to engage in any more of these substantive comments. But I also am really excited by all of the chat that is happening in the chat. So I think these are also points that we need to take forward as we're thinking about the next steps in this space. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to all of the audience who came. And again, apologies that we didn't have much time to engage with the audience questions, but I hope that you know that we'll continue to be active in this space, as are all of our panelists, and hopefully we continue to think about this problem together as we move forward. Louise,
Yes,
any other
Kathleen.
parting words?
I put it in the chat as well. This is obviously something that cannot be even begun to be unpacked in an hour and a half. But if this is something that we are passionate about in the RDA community, perhaps we can start giving it some thought. Talk to your interest group and working group chairs, get them to feed up to tabs, secretariat, and we can organize another BOF or discussion around this in the coming months. But
Thank you so much for organizing it and inviting us.
Thank you so much to all the
Thank you.
panelists. It was absolutely brilliant.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
And
Yep.
thank you, Hillary, for your support on this topic.